Thank you, Vernon. Thank you for that reading. It's Acts 16. We haven't really gone through all of Acts. Acts is the history of the early church after Jesus. Acts begins with Jesus is resurrected, and he's meeting with the apostles, disciples, and he encourages them and says, stay here in Jerusalem, until the Spirit comes on you with power, or something like that. And that's Acts 2, Acts 1 and 2. And so they hang out in Jerusalem, and then on the first day of the week, I guess, Peter's preaching a message, a sermon or whatever, and there are a lot of people are there, and the Spirit does come on them, and they're able to speak in these other languages. And Peter gives a sermon, and probably shorter than my sermon. And people respond to that, and they say, "Men and brother, what shall we do? About this Jesus?" And Peter says, "Let's go be baptized and wash away your sins." That's Acts 2, and then the church kind of grows throughout the book of Acts. And the first part of the book of Acts is about Peter to some degree, but it's really more about the message that Jesus is alive, that he's resurrected, that he's changed people's lives, that God wants to forgive you and wants to hold you and come close to you. That message is the message that they're taking to the world. And it's really about that mostly, but Peter is a major character in the first part of Acts, because they try to do that. They stay in Jerusalem for quite a while. Well, I don't know, maybe a year or two. And that's not really that long, but they stay there and they preach. They go to the temple courts, and the temple, they have the central part that's the worship part, but around it they have places where people could meet and study and discuss God. And so they go there to these outer portions, the courts, and they take a little crowd and they start preaching, and then people come and hear Peter and James and John and the other apostles preach and teach, and the church is growing. It says some place in there it's like 1,000 were baptized in a day or in a couple days, and then it says something about like the church grew to 3,000, which is pretty incredible, really. At least by today's standards, it would be. So like in just a week or two, the church really takes off. And then then at that point, the chief priests decide, the head of the Jewish nation, in a sense, the leaders. The Romans had the big overview, control. That's why the Romans had to be involved in the execution of Jesus. But in the daily, workings of things, the Jews had control of themselves in that. And the Jewish leaders get together and say, we had this Jesus, and we crucified him. We killed him. We thought we put him in the ground. Next thing we know, people say he's not, that he's resurrected. And now these guys, all they'll do is teach about him, and it's not good for us. They're embarrassing us, and people are believing in these guys, and we should do something about it. And so Peter ends up getting arrested a couple times, and John gets arrested. One time Peter and John get arrested. I think that's like chapter 5. And then, they beat him. I don't know. It was a different world. They beat people. You didn't have to have much of a reason to get beaten, back then. But today that would be a big deal. It'd be on the news, watching somebody get beat, But back then they didn't have the news like that. They didn't have pictures like that. And so they beat them, told them to stop talking about Jesus. And at one point Peter says, "How can we stop talking about Jesus? We have to obey God. We can't listen to you guys." And at that point, they want to kill him. They figured that would be the shortest route to getting rid of this guy. and some guy stands up, Gamaliel, I think in around chapter 5, and he says, let's not do that. He has the prisoners taken outside. Let's not kill them. And then he mentions 2 other people that thought they were Messiah. He says, Theudas came a while back, and he had like 400 men that were his followers, and Theudas thought he was the Messiah, and Theudas was killed. Probably they initiated that, I don't know. And his followers just fell away, and that was the end of that. You haven't heard a word about them since. And he mentioned somebody else, same kind of thing. And this guy came, and everybody was all stirred up in Jerusalem and around. And he was saying he was the Messiah, and he was killed. And the next thing you know, that was that. His followers just fell away and had given up. And so Gamaliel says, everybody respected him. He says, look, Jesus is dead. So if Jesus is dead, this thing's going to fall apart. And if it doesn't fall apart, then God must be with these people. It's not from men, it must be from God. And so that gets them out of prison one more time. And they go preaching in the temple courts again. Of course, they don't stop. But anyway, that's how the early church, it grows. Next thing you know, it's 10,000. And all in Jerusalem. And then ultimately the church goes from Jerusalem to the surrounding area to, it says Judea, that would be around Jerusalem. And then Samaria, which is, it's really not that far from Jerusalem. We would say it's like right next door. It's from between Jerusalem and the Sea of Galilee. There's a section that's called Samaria, which is the people who are from the northern kingdom. I don't know if I don't expect you to remember all that. But at some point, there's just one big kingdom. And then it gets split. They disagree, which is the nature of human beings. We disagree. And so the northern kingdom splits from the southern kingdom. And the northern kingdom, when they split, decide they're going to worship not in Jerusalem, which is where God designed it. We're going to set up a temple in Samaria. And so they do that. So the Jews don't like the Samaritans very much because they're really their cousins or their kin, but they don't worship with them anymore, right? And this is from hundreds of years have gone by. And so, but the gospel goes to them too. So Jesus says, in the beginning, in the first chapter of Acts, Jesus, before he ascends to God, he says, I'm sending you. You're my representatives. You're my apostles. I'm sending you to spread the message in Jerusalem, Judea, Samaria, and then to the ends of the world. And they hadn't got around to the ends of the world yet. And I don't think they were even thinking about it. But that's how things started off. Now, chapters go by in the book of Acts. It's relatively easy reading, other than, you're right, Vernon, it does have some names in it. I forget about that until I start reading the cities and can't figure out how to pronounce these words. And but anyway, so Paul, let me fill you in on Paul real quick. I'm sure most of you remember, but maybe not. There's a guy named Paul, which is the Greek name that people would have. If you're going to name your baby and you were Greek, you would call him Paul. But if you were Jewish or Hebrew, you would call him Saul. So Saul was the Hebrew kind of form, and Paul was the Greek form. Okay, if that makes any sense. So Saul, in chapter 9, I think it's 9, don't hold me to that. Saul finally ends up in Jerusalem. He was not in Jerusalem when Jesus was there. He's not from Jerusalem. His family's from what we would call Turkey today, southern Turkey, which is like on the Mediterranean Sea. If you guys remember Europe, you got the Mediterranean Sea, and the northern part of the Mediterranean, that's Europe mostly, except on the far eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea, that's Turkey, which people I guess consider part of Asia, because it's on the other side of the, whatever that is, the Bosphorus, or whatever people say that is. Anyway, this like river or channel that the Black Sea, that flows into the Mediterranean Sea. And so you got Asia on the Far East, the Middle East, we call it, but really that's part of Asia too, generally considered. And then the southern part of the Mediterranean Sea is Africa, northern Africa. So Paul, who grew up in southern Turkey, Cilicia or something like that, that's one of those words we'll have to figure out how to pronounce, with his family, and somehow his family was well enough off that they were Roman citizens, which was a big deal, okay? Paul's Jewish, but a Roman citizen, which is important. It'd be like sort of like being, but I'm an American. I'm a member of the United States of America. So when you persecute me, remember that, because our president might remember that too. You know what I'm saying? That kind of thing. We have a little bit of that going on. I think other countries are a little bit concerned about mistreating Americans because of that. But not near enough, but a little bit, okay? But in the Roman Empire, if you were a Roman citizen and somebody was going to mistreat you, you could always appeal to Caesar. You could say, no, you got to send me to Caesar, which actually happens at the end of Acts with Paul. He gets sent to Caesar because they're persecuting him. So they send him to Rome to talk to Caesar, to get a judgment before Caesar. So anyway, Paul's family's pretty well off, and maybe they bought that, or they did some favor for somebody. They're in the right position though for a Jew to be a Roman citizen. So Paul goes to Jerusalem, or Saul. They call him Saul in the book of Acts at this point. And he wants to be a religious leader in Jerusalem, and the official leaders are persecuting the church, right? And so Stephen stands up and preaches and explains to the people how this is God's plan. God had a plan, and this is God's plan, that the Messiah would come, that he would be persecuted and he would suffer, that he would be executed, but he would rise on the third day and live again. And that's God's plan. And the reason why that's God's plan is God is demonstrating to us that Jesus is alive and that God is real and that our faith is real. Because the bedrock of our faith is that Jesus is resurrected, that Jesus is alive. There's all kinds of things that people believe, but the bedrock of Christianity is Jesus is alive. He's resurrected. That's where your faith has to, land. And so Saul, we'll call him Saul at this point because Acts calls him Saul. They changed in a minute here. Saul participates in the persecution of people, and Stephen, because he's by the temple there, the people grab him and take him out just outside the city, and they stone him to death. So Stephen dies. He's like the first martyr. And it says, and Saul is standing there holding the cloaks of the people that are doing the stoning. And he's consenting. He's saying, yeah, this is a good idea. He's not doing it himself, but he's saying, yes, this is a good idea to stone Stephen. And so they do that. Then Saul goes to the Jewish leaders and say, look, this church is this Christianity thing, this Jesus thing. They don't call it Christianity yet. That's later. It's not going to be called Christianity for another 10 years or so. He says, let me go to Damascus. Give me some letters, some authority. I'll go to Damascus, and I'll take care of the church. Whatever, this Jesus, I'll take care of the Jesus thing in Damascus. And so they say, great idea, Saul. So they send Saul to Damascus, and on the road there, what happens? Well, Saul is blinded by a bright light. Can't see. He stops. And the people that are with him, that they stop, and they can tell that something has happening to Paul. He's like having we'd say, is he having a seizure? Or what is it, right? But they go, we could tell something's going on because you're talking to somebody, but there's nobody there. So he's blinded, but he has a vision. And it's Jesus, and Jesus says to him, why are you persecuting me? Why are you treating me like this? And Saul says, who are you? He says, this is Jesus, whom you crucified. And so obviously, or maybe not obviously, but it's obvious to me, that really has an impact on Saul. So much so that he decides, I've been making a big mistake. I've been fighting against God. I've been fighting against God. God is with these people, and I need to get straightened out. So he goes into Damascus. He's still blind when he gets into Damascus. Jesus tells him that he's going to send somebody and just go to Damascus and wait. He goes to Damascus and wait, and somehow one of the Christians in Damascus Jesus kind of talks to him, or he has he gets this thing on his heart. Well, I'm supposed to go and see this guy Saul that came to destroy us. I got to go see him. And so he does. And he goes and sees Saul. And he tells Saul, what are you doing? And you need to get busy serving God. And so it says something like scales drop from Saul's eyes, and all of a sudden he can see. And so Saul, which at this point the Bible starts calling him in Acts Paul, which we know Paul, who wrote the most books in the Bible, in the New Testament anyway. He wrote Romans, 1st and 2nd Corinthians, all those letters back there. And so Saul's in Damascus, and he starts to preach about Christianity, about Jesus. And of course that upsets people. So the next thing you know, Paul has to be let down out of Damascus in a basket over the wall because he can't go through the gate because they're going to kill Paul or Saul. And he goes to, he says, Arabia to try to figure all this stuff out. So he goes to what we would call Saudi Arabia, someplace in there, and hangs out, prays, and studies or whatever. So he takes 3 years to figure all that out, he says. Because it's really, kind of turned his world upside down in a minute. And that's about where we are. Well, not quite. So then finally he comes back. Paul, we're going to call him Paul now, not Saul, comes back to Jerusalem. And of course, at first the church in Jerusalem doesn't know if they should accept him, but they do. They finally do. And Peter accepts him, and they know each other. Peter and Paul get to know each other. Paul just didn't, he just wasn't there when Jesus was alive through the normal life. Not after resurrected. And they accept Paul. They get it, that Paul is just another servant of God. And so they say, why don't you, a guy named Barnabas is the guy who actually brings Paul to the leadership in the church in Jerusalem and gets him accepted there. And so Barnabas says, this is a good guy. Barnabas is a believer in people. He's a believer in God, and he believes in people. Okay, because later on, Barnabas believes in Mark. There's a guy named Mark. It just happens to be my name. I'm sure my mom didn't think about it that way, but anyway, it is. She just liked Mark. And Mark disappoints Paul, and Paul says, I don't want to have anything to do with him anymore. But Barnabas believes in him, says, well, I'm going to go with him. But anyway, so he goes to Antioch, which is on the Mediterranean Sea. It's north of Jerusalem a little bit. The church had gotten to that far. And Paul teaches there, preaches there. And everything's going pretty well. And they say, the church at Antioch says, Paul, we think you and Barnabas, we should send you guys on a little missionary trip. Spread the gospel to the ends of the world. And they say, okay. And of course, like people will do, where do they want to go first? Well, they'd like to go home first and preach to the people they love, right? So Barnabas is from the island of Cyprus. I think it's Cyprus, right? That's out there, kind of in the Mediterranean Sea, just off the coast between Turkey and the Middle East, what we would call, Israel, whatever. And so they go to Cyprus, and they preach there, which is where Barnabas is from. And then where do they want to go? Well, we got to go to where I'm from. So then they go to southern Turkey, which is where Paul's from. They never say, we're just going to where we're from, but that's what they do, if that makes sense. And Paul preaches there and sets up little churches all across southern and central Turkey. It's not called Turkey back then, but you know what I mean. And all that's going great. And then they come back to Antioch in a year or two, and they say, we were able to spread the word in these places, and it was great. The message, we're getting the message out there, because that's really what the book of Acts is about, how the message continues to spread. The Holy Spirit, pricks people on the heart. They respond to the message, and they believe, and they become Christians. So they have their first missionary journey, and it's called Paul's first missionary journey. Maybe in the back of your Bible, there might be a little map of Paul's missionary journey, if you have that kind of a Bible. A lot of us do. I have one like that. And then they decide, let's send you on another mission trip. That one worked so good. And Paul says, yeah, we can go and check on the churches that we set up all across Asia Minor or Turkey or whatever. I don't know what they called it back then. That part of Rome, a Roman Empire. And we'll see what God has for us to do. So they do that. They stop at these little towns where they already have the church, encouraging them and trying to keep them on the straight and narrow, in case they had some strange ideas they decided would be part of the church, which people tend to do sometimes, especially when you don't have the Bible. They didn't have the Bible yet. All they get to work from is what Paul had told them or other teachers had told them. And so Paul ends up in northern Turkey near, I don't know what it's called today. Maybe it's called Istanbul today, Constantinople, Istanbul, those are all the same cities. I don't know. I'm not sure what they're calling that little bit of land right on that channel between the Black Sea and the Mediterranean Sea. But anyway, they end up near there, and Paul has a vision that there's a man in Macedonia saying, come and help us. So Paul says, I have this vision. I think we're supposed to go to Europe. I think we're supposed to go across there and go to Europe. And I'm sure they were like, that's what their voices did. They all went high right then. They all said, what? You got to go to Europe? They've never been anywhere, right? Paul's never been out of Asia. He thinks it's great that he made it to Jerusalem and back. That was a big deal. Now he's going to go to Europe. And they do. So, that's what Vernon read. They get a little boat. They go to, I don't know, the cities that Vernon mentioned. Maybe Thyatira, maybe it was one of them or something. I don't know. But anyway, they end up in Philippi, which it says is a Roman colony. And that's a big deal. Or in the leading city of the area, it says. And they're there, and they don't really have a system on how they're going to evangelize or how they're going to do their mission work. Philippi must not have enough Jews to have a synagogue. You got to have at least 10 men to have a synagogue. Apparently they didn't have that. So Paul says, well, if there's any Jews or God-fearers, in other words, people that already believed in, our God, Yahweh, whatever, Jesus is God, they'll probably be at this river, a place to pray. And so they go out there, and sure enough, there's Lydia out there and some other women. He preaches to them, and Lydia accepts the gospel. And they're not staying with her at this point, but then she says, if you consider me a sister, if you consider me a Christian, then why don't you come and stay at my house? Lydia's a successful businesswoman, and Paul says, okay. And so they go and do that. And that's how that passage ends up. The word has spread now to Europe, which is a big deal, led by the Spirit. Okay, so that's all I have time for, really. And I appreciate you guys. I could keep going. And you notice I don't even haven't looked at my notes yet. Just think about how that works out. Because I always have notes, right? And I'll just give you a heads up and what I wanted to talk about, and you can think about it. This week, or last week, there was a new pope installed in Rome for the Roman Catholic Church. And, it's okay with me. I'm sure the Pope's a better person than me, probably. I mean, I don't see that as being that hard. He's lived a life completely given to God. He's celibate, and we hope, right? Supposed to be part of the thing. I'm definitely not. I have kids I love, and anyway, he's got nothing, and I have stuff. He's probably a better person than me, and which is good. because he's head of a huge church with millions of people and lots of responsibility, I would think. And all that's fine. I don't really have anything against Catholic people in general. Roman Catholics, I think they're fine. Some of them are the best Christians ever. Vicki and I visited Rome maybe about 20 years ago, and we arrived in Rome on a Sunday. Let me just give you some heads up. I don't know what it's like today, but 20 years ago, don't arrive in Rome on a Sunday, because they don't have anything. You can't get a taxi. Everybody is off work because it's Sunday. Okay, now this is just 20 years ago. Now I know 100 years ago, or maybe 200 years ago, people didn't work that much on Sunday. But now, at least now, in this year, 2025, everybody works on Sunday, right? It's just another work day, really, for a lot of people. And that's fine. I'm not condemning them, nothing. I'm just saying we showed up in Rome on a Sunday, and we couldn't get to our hotel. So here we are with our luggage. I'm carrying my luggage, and Vicky's trying to roll her luggage, and a Catholic priest comes along who happens to speak English because he's from Ireland, which is a good thing because we don't speak Italian. And he said, "Let me help you folks. You guys look pretty desperate," right? Isn't that what he says, basically? So you look pretty desperate. Someone's probably going to knock you over and steal your stuff, which is probably true. So anyway, he helped us get to our hotel. So that was a good thing. I felt like, man, at that moment, God sent us that priest, even though we're not Catholic. But if, all things being equal, I might have converted on that day, right? Because he helped us. And we were much younger, so we were like 40. Well, that was 30 years ago. Anyway, regardless, we were brave, we were ridiculous, ignorant and brave. And so we went to Europe, just Vicki and I, no chaperones, nobody doing anything for us. And we had a great time. And actually people were wonderful. People at the hotel were wonderful, because we hadn't planned out any meals, and restaurants are not open either on Sunday. Just like, what? I'm thinking it's more like America, but it's not. And we had a great time. So anyway, the Pope is installed, and I don't have a problem with any of that. They can do whatever they want. That's their church, not our church. But this one statement got to me. This Pope is the latest Pope in the long line of popes that stretch all the way back to Peter, who was the first Pope in the church in Rome. And let me just say this, and maybe I could address all this next week. There is no evidence that Peter was ever in Rome. Well, not even in Rome, and definitely not the first Pope in Rome. No one mentions it from the first century. Paul never mentions it, and Paul ends up in Rome. And Paul ends up being killed in Rome. And we know that he wrote these letters from Rome, and they're in the Bible, his letters. He doesn't mention Peter being in Rome. He addresses about 20 people at the end of the book of Romans. He says, and because he's not there right now, but if Peter should have been there, he was the Pope in Rome, and he said, say hi to this guy, say hi to this guy, say hi to Priscilla, say hi to Aquila. So Paul has all these people. Hey, and I'm coming over to you guys in Rome. I'll be there as soon as I can, but say hi to all these people that I love. He would have said at least, say hi to Peter. Paul would have said, say hi to Peter, your bishop. But he doesn't say that. And there's no other first century evidence, writings, that say that Peter was the Pope or even in Rome. And it got to me after about the 12th time I've heard that. It's like, because the news people present it like it's just a fact. It's just a fact of life. Where it's not a fact of life. It's what they want to believe, because they built this whole idea about the Pope around this idea. So, I was going to do that. But as you can tell, you don't want to get me going on any topic. You're probably glad when I just read my sermons, because I'm usually done by now, and service is usually ending about now. Okay, we don't have much more to do. I love you guys. I appreciate very much that you allow me to speak to you. I hope it encourages you. I hope it makes you feel like, well, maybe there's a reason why we're here, and we shouldn't all just flow down to the local Catholic Church. Because if it's not true, if he's not the first pope, and it's kind of a mythology or just a little story that's made up, to me, it says that when someone wants to believe in Jesus, and they say, well, and he's the first pope, and then if anyone does any research on that, and they realize, no, not really. To me, it makes you wonder about the authenticity, the truth statement about Jesus. Because here's a false statement that you're clinging to, where I just, does that make any sense? It's like if you give this evidence, Jesus is real, and here's another story that we really like, that we're going to say is real, but it's not really real. I don't know. I may have hurt people's feelings. I don't know. Maybe not. But that's where I'm at. And that's what I was going to do. So I do appreciate you letting me talk to you, because it's really a privilege. When I was younger, I didn't understand it to be as big a privilege as I do now. I don't know what to tell you. Just that's how it is when you get a little bit older. You realize how short life is and how much how lucky you are, and just lucky that you are able to live and breathe and not sick, not really sick. I mean, I hurt all the time now, don't I, Vicky? I hurt all the time. Both of us do. I don't know what that is. Well, you know what it is. And but we're lucky. We're lucky we have you folks. You guys are a constant encouragement to me. Before I started preaching here, obviously I'd already been to college and did all that and preached at another place and all that. But we were just kind of, we didn't really have any real direction we were doing as far as the church goes. We would go to church with Shackelford down in Harrison pretty often. But we didn't have any place where we felt like we were really working. So I just want to thank you for that.